think so.
Welcome back to Horror Movies.
In a few seconds, you're going to listen to a frightening tale narrated by me. Fear awaits you. Watch out and take care. In Natasha's home, the baby is sitting in the baby stroller, while Mrs. Eves is sitting on the couch. Natasha enters the living room, with a glass of water which she hands to Mrs. Eves. After drinking the water, Mrs. Eves gets up from the couch, and tells Natasha they have to find Jack and remove the curse on the baby. But she falls to the ground and the baby giggles. Natasha tells Mrs. Eves that she just had a heart attack and should be in the hospital. But Mrs. Eves argues that she doesn't have to be in the hospital. Natasha insists that Mrs. Eves has to clean up first, eat, and get some rest. She helps Mrs. Eves get up from the floor and then leads her to the bathroom. Mrs. Eves tells Natasha that she is being too soft on the baby, but Natasha tells Mrs. Eves that she is rather being too soft on her. While Mrs. Eves is in the bathtub, Natasha asks her if she believes that the curse she placed on Jack is the cause of all these paranormal occurrences, and Mrs. Eves says yes. Natasha asks her how the curse could be lifted, and Mrs. Eves says there are ways. Natasha then reads something off her phone and says that during medieval times, the victim and the person who placed the curse were to be burnt to death, and that way the curse dies with the two of them. Meanwhile, Bobby has to perform on stage with her partner Sam in about 30 minutes. Just before they get on stage, Bobby informs Sam that according to Patricia, they have to wait 6 more months before they can be given a baby. Back in Natasha's place, Mrs. Eves hallucinates and sees Helen enter the bathtub with her. She reassures Helen that she is going to kill Jack, and Helen says she knows. On stage, Bobby, still upset about having to wait for 6 more months before they can be given a baby, does not cooperate with Sam, and ends up ruining the performance. At her place, Natasha brings Mrs. Eves some food. And while eating, Mrs. Eves tells Natasha that she found the baby with a woman in Cornwall a month after the death of Helen. Mrs. Eves explains that it took her some years before she understood exactly what the baby wanted and was doing. The baby always went for childless women who, like Natasha, didn't want to have a baby. Somehow, the women reminded the baby of his mother Helen, and he sought unconditional love from the women, the love Helen failed to give him. And when these women were not able to love him unconditionally, he eliminated them and moved on to the next. And even more troubling is the fact that no one really could love him exactly the way he wanted. Mrs. Eves then reiterates that it is her cause that is responsible for this. She is not exactly scared of death, but she's scared of dying without putting an end to this phenomenon. Later that night, Natasha tells Mrs. Eves that she found Jack, and apparently he has lung disease and has been admitted to a hospital. Natasha says they'll go in search of Jack tomorrow. Shortly afterward, Natasha falls asleep, and Mrs. Eves sneaks out of the house and heads to the hospital. While Mrs. Eves is at the hospital, Natasha dreams that Mrs. Eves' younger version, more often known as Noor, is sitting next to her, explaining a Bulgarian song. Noor tells Natasha that there is no such thing as a curse and that a curse is just another story we tell ourselves. She tells Natasha to give the baby what he wants. She then wakes up and realizes that Mrs. Eves and the baby are no longer inside. Mrs. Eves finally finds Jack in the ward, surrounded by his daughters. She waits until the girls are out of the ward before she goes in with the baby. She pours some petrol all over Jack, and Jack wakes up but doesn't recognize Mrs. Eves. Mrs. Eves pours some petrol on herself as well and calls Jack by his name. Jack then recognizes Mrs. Eves as Helen's friend, and Mrs. Eves presents the baby to Jack as his son. Jack asks Mrs. Eves why she's here, and Mrs. Eves says she's here to finish what she started. Jack didn't know that the baby was still alive, for he has always believed that he drowned with Helen. Mrs. Eves calls him a liar and tells him that the baby didn't die. Jack then blames Helen for being irresponsible and for making the baby malicious by not loving him. He then hits Mrs. Eves and tries to strangle her. Jack dies while struggling with Mrs. Eves, and Mrs. Eves is upset that it is the baby who killed Jack. She is the one who is supposed to kill him. The two of them are supposed to die together. Meanwhile, Natasha is in the hospital now, trying to locate Jack's ward. She finally enters the ward and finds Mrs. Eves trying to burn Jack and possibly herself. Natasha takes the blowtorch away from Mrs. Eves and tells her that she didn't start this and can't end it. Natasha tells Mrs. Eves that in fact there is no curse, and the baby can be stopped by simply giving him what he wants. Mrs. Eves tries to stop Natasha, but Natasha carries the baby and walks out of the hospital. Natasha seems to have accepted the baby as hers and is willing to give the baby exactly what he desperately wants, unconditional love. And somehow now, the baby now controls Natasha and has her all to himself. Natasha takes the baby to a postnatal center for a routine checkup. The doctor at the center tries to take the baby from the baby stroller and check on him, but Natasha tells the doctor that the baby doesn't like anyone touching him and stops the doctor from touching the baby. Natasha's phone starts buzzing in her bag and she turns to check the phone. The doctor carries the baby from the stroller, and the moment Natasha finds out, she attacks and injures the doctor, and then leaves the center. Bobby meets Sam, with all of Sam's belongings packed in a suitcase which Bobby hands to Sam. Just before she leaves, Sam opens up to Bobby about her feeling of loneliness. And the fact that Bobby wants something so badly, a baby in this case, which isn't her, does not make Sam feel any better. Later, Bobby arrives at Natasha's home and finds Mrs. Eves sleeping in her car on the other side of the road. Bobby asks Mrs. Eves if she has seen Natasha, but Mrs. Eves doesn't answer, so Bobby walks into Natasha's home. There is no one inside, and Bobby comes out and enters Mrs. Eves' car. She expresses her worry about Natasha's safety and asks Mrs. Eves to explain to her what exactly is happening, but Mrs. Eves tells her that Natasha has already told her what this is all about. Mrs. Eves, however, goes on to explain to Bobby that the baby is made of something very old, and he is a bottomless pit of need. Unfortunately, he now has Natasha all to himself. Mrs. Eves later asks Bobby to leave the car. Natasha returns to the house carrying the baby. She tells the baby that she would not have left him, and he shouldn't have hurt the doctor at the postnatal center. She then reassures the baby that she's always here for him. Afterward, she lays the baby in bed and puts him to sleep. Natasha hears a knock on the door, and when she opens the door, she finds her father Lyle standing right before her. Soon the baby starts crying, and Natasha tells her father that he should leave. Natasha goes in and gets the baby, trying to calm him, telling the baby that her father won't stay for long. Lyle insists that Natasha needs to take a break, so he carries the baby into the bedroom and lays him on the bed. Natasha then gets possessed by the baby and hits her father with a bottle. For a moment, Natasha gets a flashback of her attacking the nurse at the postnatal center. And now she has just hit her own father. She pleads with the baby to leave her alone. Then there is another knock on her door, and this time it's Bobby. Bobby has just got some stuff for the baby, and while in the house, Bobby apologizes to Natasha for what happened at the Jupiter house. She admits that she was in fact jealous of Natasha for having a baby, and hadn't cared enough to really understand what she was going through. Bobby tells Natasha that she's now willing to help her with the baby. Natasha expresses her gratitude to Bobby, but tells her that she is fine. Bobby asks if their father is inside, and Natasha says no and tells Bobby that she should leave since it's getting late. Bobby gets up to leave and deliberately lets a glass of water fall from her hand and shatter on the floor. Natasha yells at Bobby, who apologizes and tells Natasha she's going to get a towel. Bobby goes into the bedroom and finds their father lying unconscious on the floor. Lyle suddenly wakes up and asks Bobby what is going on. Bobby tells him to remain calm. Bobby then returns to Natasha without the towel. Natasha stares at the baby and realizes that the baby is about to make her do a horrible thing. She turns to Bobby and tells her to run, but Bobby gets attacked by Natasha before she could leave the house. Mrs. Eves enters Natasha's house and finds Bobby trapped inside the closet, with a plastic bag covering her head and suffocating her. Mrs. Eves takes the plastic bag off Bobby's head, and Bobby tells Mrs. Eves that the baby is controlling Natasha. The baby starts to cry, somehow letting Natasha know that someone is inside. Natasha moves away from the baby, perhaps to see who is in her home. Mrs. Eves then moves to the baby, trying to distract him with the bun. But Natasha appears from behind and stabs Mrs. Eves. Natasha suddenly realizes what she just did and lets the knife fall from her hand. Now convinced that no one can help her, Natasha leaves the house and drives out with the baby, yelling at the baby while driving. Natasha wants to throw the baby off the cliff, and she's almost certain that the baby is going to die this time because there will be no one to catch him. Bobby goes into the bedroom to check on her father. He assures her that he'll find an ambulance. But then Mrs. Eves tells Bobby they have to go after Natasha. They enter the car and chase after Natasha. Bobby finds Natasha sitting with the baby. Natasha tells Bobby that she does not know what her life is about now, but Bobby tells her she doesn't have to, that no one really knows what their life is about. Natasha gets up with the baby and moves closer to the edge of the cliff. Bobby tells Natasha to just let go of the baby, and just then Mrs. Eves appears and asks Natasha to hand her the baby so she can say her final goodbye to him. Mrs. Eves receives the baby from Natasha and then falls from the cliff. However, Natasha also jumps off and saves Mrs. Eves from drowning. At the shore, Natasha asks Mrs. Eves if it's over, and Mrs. Eves tells her she thinks so. Natasha finally reunites with her friends Mags and Rita, and Bobby gets to do what she really likes to do, playing with kids, while Sam stares at her smiling. In the end, it is revealed that the baby didn't drown, but actually crawled out of the water. And maybe Mrs. Eves was wrong after all, and it is not over yet. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more videos like this. Thanks for watching.